the late retired President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, but of key importance as well is the fact that some of the political leaders are there as well to attend. There is two special sittings today at the National Assembly and at the Senate at exactly 2:30 today. They'll be meeting at the Senate chambers and at the National Assembly chambers. This is courtesy of the presidential proclamation that was issued on the 4th of February 2020, just after the death of retired President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, that could actually alter the calendar of both houses. So today they will be talking about that, save for the National Assembly that is going to have another extra motion that is to discuss the notification of the message of the president regarding persons that were nominated for appointment as cabinet secretaries and principal secretaries. So the National Assembly will be discussing that notification and as well as the presidential proclamation of the 4th of February 2020. But the Senate is going to be meeting only to discuss that proclamation and how it's going to alter the calendar of the House. So many of the leaders are there just to also take advantage of this opportunity, as well as they wait for that special sitting that will happen at 2:30. Now with me in studio is a panel, it's a cocktail of a panel that will give us an experience of the other sides of Moi that probably many Kenyans could not have gotten a chance to understand. I'm hosting a panel of 3 gentlemen. I'll start from my far left. That is lawyer Steve Mugaka. Today he says and insists that he's coming in the capacity of a banker, and that is where we'll be borrowing from, just to also understand where he's coming from and how he has been able to interact with Moi and his leadership. And sitting at the center, we have Mheshimiwa Philomen Mwaikasa. He has served in various capacities as the permanent secretary then in different ministries under the Moi era. He's also served in the Constitution Implementation Committee. And also most importantly is that he comes from where Moi came from. He served there for 4 good years as the DC in Baringo County. This is where Moi comes from. So quite an experience about how things were during that time, having been a DC and having transferred to other areas. But how was the situation in Baringo County, and how was the relationship between the DCs and the administrators then with the retired President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi? He'll be shedding more light on that. And a political and governance expert, Dr. Churchil Saoke. Thank you so much for creating time for us. A lot has been said about the style of leadership of Moi and how he steered this nation forward. So we'll be getting quite an insight from this gentleman on how Moi was in leadership, how Moi was in his relations with people, in people who are working under him in this particular conversation. Remember, you can also share your messages of what you remember about Moi at Safin_Chin. Personally, and at KBC Channel 1, that's our official Twitter handle in social media, so that we can be able to share with Kenyans what you, wherever you're watching us from in a small corner of this particular nation, remember about the retired president. But gentlemen, thank you so much for creating time for us today. I'd like to begin straight away with let me start with Steve Mugaka. I've known you quite a bit as a lawyer, and then today you surprised me. You tell me a bit about your interaction with the late President Moi.
Thank you so much. In fact, my first interaction with His Excellency, the President, now deceased, was when he first threw me as a university entrant to paramilitary training in the Kenya National Youth Service. That was about 1983. But prior to that, I happened to have gone to school next to Gatundu at Ruiru High School, where the first president of the Republic of Kenya always made trips from Mombasa or from State House to Gatundu. But more importantly, when I completed school, of course, it was very unfortunate for us as the pioneer National Youth Service recruits, which was a precondition to go to National Youth Service. But it did help us prepare on how to deal with university life, including when we had very hardcore university student leaders who I'll not go into today. But thank God that when I got into employment, my first calling was into the banking sector. And that is why for about 20 years, I had a serious interaction with the president and his enterprises. The president was an entrepreneur, which many people don't know, because he has investments that cut across virtually every sector, name it, whether farming, whether manufacturing, whether transport, whether banking, whether media, whether education. He has very many educational establishments. He was an investor par excellence, if you like. And as a banker, I found it very curious that a head of state running a country complex as Kenya had the time to personally run, administer, and manage his own enterprises as he did. I was one of the beneficiaries of employment in one of the banks he had major interests, and where majority of his transactions went through. And I saw a disciplined manager of enterprise that that would make very sound business decisions, very sound investment decisions, and he would sign his checks personally and even call you as a manager to follow up to ensure that his transactions are done as instructed, because as a bank we were on a duty to always confirm a check that has been issued by a customer before it gets cleared, particularly when it was a signature that is written in green, because it was a trademark green signature that would, and that was the only check instrument that was ever signed in that color. So my experience with His Excellency was that, he was a very disciplined manager, and also an equal opportunity employer in most of his enterprises, because we had occasion to also process the payroll of most of his enterprises, and I can tell you he is an equal opportunity employer, because from the payroll you would quite see the diversity of faces that drain the various functions within his enterprises. And for that, I will remember the president as one who was really committed to growing this economy. Unlike other presidents in other countries that we learn of that are known more for, siphoning the country's resources and investing them offshore, I think President Moi was such one man who gave it all to this nation, gave it all for the growth of this economy, and was an equal opportunity employer. Okay,
thank you so much for that, and we'll get to understand more about Moi the businessman as we continue this conversation. But Mwaikasa, also tell us, because from what we know is that Moi had a way of knowing everything that was happening in this country, courtesy of people who are serving in capacities such as yours. Tell us a bit about your initial interaction with Moi. How did your paths cross? How did you get to, interact with Moi in the initial stages?
I think, Madam, before I go into that, let me take this opportunity on behalf of myself and the family that I belong to convey our condolences and message of sympathy to the family of the late president, and wish them God's blessings as they go through this painful experience. My journey with the president is a long one. I was employed as a DO in 1975, and therefore, as the president took over the running of this country in 1978, I was already in public service, and therefore had an opportunity to serve as a district officer for 4 years. And then after that, I was appointed district commissioner, that's in Nyandarua, worked in Busia, later moved to Baringo for 4 years, and of course I served also in Kitui on his appointment. Now, my interaction with him was one that taught me that the president was one who would identify talent, because I was appointed as a district commissioner at a very young age, actually 29 years old. And I happened then to be appointed as PS at the age of 35. This told me very clearly that he is a man who is not tribalistic, but identifies talent in whoever is serving under him. And therefore, I had the opportunity, therefore, to serve as a DC in this place for 4 years. And then later, I became PS for 12 years in different ministries, but identifies talent in whoever is serving under him. And therefore, I had the opportunity, therefore, to serve as a DC in this place for 4 years. And then later, I became PS for 12 years in different ministries, moving from transport and communication, supplies and marketing, tourism and wildlife, moved into cooperatives, Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Health. This president of ours who has left us taught me a lot of things. One, he was a man who respected all people, irrespective of their positions. There is no day the late president called me Moisaka. He called me either Bwana DC, Bwana Moisaka, or Bwana PS. And that taught me a lot of humility, in the sense that he is a president, but he respects somebody for his office. That is contrary to what you would see today in our country, where people call people names without really bothering about respecting the offices they are holding. As a born-again Christian, I found somebody who supported me, who was God-fearing. Every Sunday he was in church. And for information, on the day I arrived in Baringo, he actually gave my testimony. And I found myself really feeling nice to talk about Jesus after that, because the marketing had already been done by none other but the president. In fact, he cautioned the people in Baringo not to spoil me. Here is a DC who has come, please don't spoil him, he's a Christian. The other thing which I learned from him is the fact that you should not move making decisions without consulting. And my first experience with the president was when I arrived in Kabrak to report that I have come as the DC Baringo. He simply asked me one question, which I came to value very much after. He asked me, Bwana Moisaka, you have come to Baringo. What do you think I should do for you in order for you to serve Baringo people well? And my answer was very simple. I told him, Your Excellency, it was on a Friday. Your Excellency, if you can go to Baringo and tell people that I am the representative of His Excellency the President in Baringo, I'll be very comfortable. And do you know, Madam? He told me, we shall have the meeting on Monday. He called all the leaders, the political leaders, the CAN leaders and others, and he told them, you people, if you have anything to talk about Baringo, go through the district commissioner. And you can be sure I saluted very much, because I knew I had scored. And that's what made me very effective as a DC in Baringo. The other thing which I think I would like to say is that the president, the late president, loved people who are honest and forthright. And I would give one example as far as that is concerned. Every year he would give me money to make an end party for people, for the officers. Your people have worked well, I give you so much to go and have a party for them. And one time he gave me 200,000 shillings.
And back then that was
a lot of
money.
So when I went and made a budget for the party, it ended up being 80,000 shillings, which means I had a balance of 120,000. Do you know, Madam, I took the money back to him, which was a big shock and surprise to him. He told me, what have you done? No, Mzee, we have spent 80,000. We have held parties for everybody. The balance that I have is this much. Do you know what he did? He told me, return that money to your pocket. He went to his room, brought me another 120,000. So I went out with 240,000. The point he was just trying to communicate is simply be honest, and I will reward you. The other thing which I think we have to learn as a country from him is time management. He will call you even as a very junior person to go and see him in State House at 6. Once you arrive there, you'd feel perhaps you may wait for some few hours to see him. The truth is, if you said 6, it was 6. You would meet him. Time management, which is a serious crisis in Kenya now, where people talk about 10 and they come at 12 or they come at 2. I think we have a lesson to learn from the late president. The other point I think which is important for us to mention is that he respected the family unit. He would get concerned about your children. He would get concerned about your wife. He would get concerned about your family. I remember one time my late mother, my late father, and my late mother-in-law were with me in Baringo, and we went visiting him. And the only thing he said is, this gentleman of yours does not want to do business. I will make sure that I reward him. He promised the 3 people. And I'm glad after a short while, he actually made VPS at a very young age.
And we'll talk about that journey as well in a bit, but let me come to you, Churchil. So many sides and so many stories have been told about Moi, especially now that he has died. Unfortunately, many people are coming to learn more about him as compared to when he was alive. You know, what is it that stands out for you? Which side of Moi you feel, as he's laid to rest on Wednesday, this is something that will always remain in the minds of Kenyans as the strongest part about Moi?
Moi was a very firm leader who believed in the direction that he took at any given time. And I think this may have been informed by his strong belief in destiny. You know, I think when I look at the way Moi carried out himself, there was something that was driving him beyond, that is just beyond normal. And many times when you get inert into the leaders of Moi's style, you realize that there is aspects of destiny that drive them, that makes them be very orderly. When you hear what my colleagues are saying, it was, you know, there was a way he wanted things to happen, and they had to happen like that. It means that this is a man of purpose, a man who when he got into power, he knew where this country should go, and it had to be that way. It then exhibited itself in his order, the way he was carrying out himself, in terms of its leadership style, extremely hands-on and free with everybody. It exhibited itself in the way in which he organized his leadership organization units. You know, one of the things that I find extremely remarkable about Moi's leadership was the way he was able to cascade his development-oriented units to the local. You know, today you look at the way in which our social stratum is formed. We are sort of mobilizing ourselves around political groupings, and when you go into the local communities, we are more affiliated with our political groupings, which do not necessarily have implications in development. But when you look at Moi's style, his units at the grassroots were informed by the need for the locals to develop themselves. And I think this is something very remarkable. Look at the ways the DOs and the chiefs who are handling people at the ground. Their key focus in the barazas was, how do we build gabions? You know, how do we build roads?
Identify the specific need of every community and solve that.
So that is something I really find extremely remarkable, and it's one thing that our leadership this time across the board, you know, even those who are outside leadership should really reflect deep upon, because today you find there is too much emphasis on political mobilization, you know, without necessarily, you know, how does this political mobilization bring bring development to the local unit. And it then focuses more of the mobilization towards government bring to us, and not us championing our own cause in our very small ways. And one of the things that I highlight, which I find is the big gap, is that big gap. Look at estates today. You find estates coming up with their own development units, and you find that the administration is really outside. So the administration sort of is left only to sign, maybe, you know, verify whether you are a resident to get a birth certificate. They are not too much integrated into the development of the communities. During Moi's time, the chief's role was to ensure that development happens on the grassroots. There is cascading of information from the top government down into the communities. So this is something that I really find very remarkable. The other thing that I find very remarkable was his contribution into the global stage. And I think there is something that we forget to appreciate about Moi's role in making Kenya to circumvent the highly complex politics of the Cold War. This was one of the most difficult politics that Moi played and made Kenya come out very strongly. And when you look at the way in which he was able to camouflage, because when you look at the Cold War time, the West and the East were heavily investing in developing countries to have the ideologies of either socialism or the communism get into the communities or into societies. Moi was able to circumvent the divide and make Kenya come out as a very key strategic country in the region in terms of peace and stability. And that later on made Kenya be very strategic and was able to take part in huge peace processes in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Sierra Leone, and in so many parts of the country where, you know, we were having generals taking part in peace processes. Today, the country Kenya is seen as an epitome of peace and stability that many countries outside there really want to emulate because of that foundation that Moi made. So these are the things that we really must learn about the former president. And of course, the other thing is that he has lived 95 years.
Yeah.
And why has he lived 95 years? He was able to order his lifestyle, the things he's eating, where he's going. These are things that we must really learn today. How do we live old? How do we live to our old age? We must be careful about our consumption, about even how we control our lives. So these are things that we should learn from this great man who is lying down here.
All right. And, you know, you've talked about quite a number of issues. And one thing that I also want us to talk more about, and this I'd like to bring you in, Philomen, is, you know, the chiefs were very instrumental during this time, the community leaders, because, you know, what Churchill is saying is the development was people-driven as opposed to what we're witnessing right now, the up-bottom approach. What is it about Moi and how he ran his business that made the administrators, the chiefs, the community leaders respected and have that level of influence during that time compared to what we witnessed for, you know, the other eras? During Moi's time, the people who were serving in your capacity were respected, and what they said was actually something that the community took very serious. What is it that he did to instill that?
What happened is the fact that the DC, or if I may begin with the PC, the DC, the chief, the DO, were actually everything. I'm saying everything in the sense that if you talked about environment, the DC was the District Environment Committee Chairman. If you talked about health, the DC was the chairman of the District Health Committee. If you talked about security, for example, the DC was the chairman. Now the point was that this was supported by law, so that in the end you wouldn't do anything that concerns development or security within the county without the DC getting involved. Of course, as we liberalized, we almost committed political suicide, in the sense that we started saying provincial administration is the worst enemy of development in the country. I am glad that we have repented that sin, to the extent that we are going back now to the old system where the president would be represented by the regional coordinator at the provincial level. He would be represented by the county commissioner at the county level. The point was that there are powers which powers were not written in law. Some residual powers. If you are representing the president, then you are representing the president. But what he made sure he did was that he knew all the district commissioners by name, and he had their telephone lines. For example, when I was in Nyandarua, he would call me directly. I was a small district commissioner. But he would call me and he would ask me, Philomen Mwaikasa, what is happening in your county? What is this that I hear?
And that is what some have termed as his greatest.
He would call me directly. I was a small district commissioner. But he would call me and he would ask me, Philomen Mwaikasa, what is happening in your county? What is this that I hear?
And that is what some have termed as his greatest strength, in gathering information about what is happening.
He would gather information and he would actually consume that information. Perhaps contrary to what may be happening today. By 7, the president would know everything that is happening in the republic. And he would now be doing some counter-checking, just to say whether this thing that he has heard is true. So he's somebody I respected, because now I had to make sure, for example, as a DC, I had all my figures on the table.
Because
you
he
don't
can call
know.
any time.
Yeah, he will wake up
answers.
he'll wake up and he will tell you, on a DC, can you please tell me how many girls are in Baringo High School, how many boys, because it was a mixed school that time, how many boys are there? And he will be waiting for you either to lie or to tell him the truth. So I learned also to say, okay, I don't have the figures.
You have to be honest.
I'll come back to you.
Okay.
And he respected that. I remember one time there was somebody who was sick at the Cabernet Hospital. And unfortunately, the people who went to see him found him using his own blanket, not the hospital blanket. So Mzee called me at 6 and he told me, Bwana DC, what is this that is happening in Cabernet Hospital? And I said, Mzee, what is it? Somebody is using his own blanket rather than using a government blanket. Can you go and check? So I said, Your Excellency, I don't think that would happen in my hospital. I am telling you, Bwana DC, go and check. And I went there. The truth is that that person was covering himself with his own personal blanket.
So he knew before you even asked.
He did. So I asked him, Mzee, why are you covering yourself like this? He said, no, those who have been covering themselves with the government blankets, I've been seeing them going. So I wanted just to cover myself with one that I would feel safe about. I went back to him. And I told him, Mzee, what you told me is true. So he would say, Mwaikasa, you know, I know everything. He has a lot of information. So I wanted to confirm that his information gathering was powerful.
And Steve, this also he used to make sure that it was not very easy for anyone to plan anything against him.
Oh, sure. In terms of national intelligence, because the late president utilized the structures that were there very effectively. Aside from the provincial administration, he had other information channels, right from the NSIS, headed by Mr. Kanyotu at that time. They had a way of gathering intelligence and filing separately to the president. Aside from that, he had the political party machinery, where he had the political party officials, and it was a very robust information gathering network that incorporated the Maendeleo ya Wanawake, which had a way of conveying gender issues direct to the president. He had even the youth for KANU, which would deal with the intragenerational issues and relay them. And the president actually was everywhere, every time. He was in touch with everybody, everywhere, every time. And he also moved around. He moved around, I think, incredibly, because he was able, notwithstanding the road networks at that time, he was able to reach every corner of the Republic, which made his presence and ownership by the ordinary citizenry very easy, because access to the presidency was very regular. In addition to that, there used to be, time and time again, delegations from this district, from that district. You would hear a delegation of ordinary citizens, going. They used to call it to pledge loyalty to the president, but it was really an information gathering.
And they never left empty-handed.
No, they went back happy.
You can never leave Moi's presence empty-handed.
For the time, even as students, we looked for the time when we are invited to Cabernet Gardens. So the president was a president for everybody, every time, everywhere. And for that reason, he was quite in touch. And I was impressed because by doing that, he made, he created a situation that there was surveillance of the entire public service, so that, there would be no monkey business in any part of this country. But what Philomen has said, I want to underscore as a business student, that there was a mechanism of doing development and using the district as a planning unit. In fact, they had a district development committee. There was a DDC, that integrated, every spheres of, of the sectors that would sit, distill what that particular district needed, and decisions and priorities would be, be decided on. And I do remember the most powerful chief secretary at that time, Mr. Simon Nyachai, took that baton and, devised what they were calling the district focus for rural development, which was a devolution of some sort at that time when we were a unitary state. So the President Moi utilized every infrastructure that was available to him to reach out, to devolve national resources, and also to build national cohesion. I think that we are seeing very challenging at this time. In fact, for my district, I'm so happy because the president also increased the district units, the administrative units, and expanded the districts we had. Indeed, the county units we have today, the county government we have today, as a result of the districts that existed, is it in 1992? And I thank God that Nyamira district had become a district, a new district that time, and that is why we have a Nyamira county where I come from. So this is a president who had a way of outreach. This is a president who cared for everybody, irrespective of the region. And this is a president who knew whenever hunger or, the drought or the weather had ravaged certain sections of the country. This was a president who was there, and through the district commissioners, he would ensure that food reached every part of the Republic. I do remember Ethiopia, there was, starvation, and it took international artists to go and mobilize resources for them, but not in Kenya. And we are just, a border away from. So this is a president who really cared and respected the rights to life for every citizen, and the rights to education of every child. And he will truly be remembered for that.
Okay, Steve. Philomen, tough as he was he consultative? How was it working under him as a PS, working as an administrator under his government? Was he consultative? Or
he was very consultative. Very consultative. Because there's no time he would make a decision without consulting you. And after you have agreed on the direction to follow, then you go ahead and implement. But unfortunately, we had a few crooked people who would want to create a situation that would benefit themselves, would benefit them personally. So they would create something called instructions from above, which you have heard about. But basically, it was meant to mess up the situation for personal benefits.
What about the calls? Not even calls. You'd just be fired at 1 over the news. And, you know,
yes,
the changes, the drastic changes he made, you know, this tough side of Moi.
He was a disciplinarian, and I'm sure he would not take any decision before he confirms the information he has. And in the process, there would be some collateral damage. Some people would suffer unfairly, because we are living in a political environment. If we gather 4 or 5 people to talk about one individual negatively, and perhaps the same is confirmed by the security network, somebody would be sacked in the afternoon. I was posted to Nigeria in the afternoon at 1 o'clock. It's not very sweet, but the man had the power to do so. And surely we must respect the discretion that he had. I wanted to support my brother regarding the district focus for rural development. We talk about devolution so much today without accepting the fact that there was somebody who tried to initiate it in the 80s. Because basically through the DDCs, the late president, wanted the local people to decide for themselves what their priorities were. And his intention was also to make sure that the local people were involved through project committees to ensure that implementation was done without losing resources. At the same time, the people would have an opportunity to evaluate whatever was going on, which is similar to what is happening today with the devolution. But of course, without corruption then.
How was his cabinet, if you compare with the others that came after his era? Many cabinet secretaries have talked about him as somebody who was very close to his cabinet. He could chair most cabinet meetings that were very frequent. You know, describe for us how that was during that time.
He actually chaired all the cabinet meetings.
All, not most.
Yeah, we are surprised that today, you can hear somebody chairing a cabinet meeting. It must be chaired by the president, and he did, and he had time for that. But one thing which is important is all the appointed ministers knew that the president knew his stuff, so that they had to prepare themselves well when communicating to him. But what is important to note here is that apart from the cabinet secretaries who were ministers that time, there were PSs. If he realized that his minister is a bit weak, he made sure that he empowered the PS effectively, so that in terms of briefs and information, he would go directly to the PS. That's how some very weak ministers that time survived, because he had direct communication, of course intelligently and very discreetly, so that at the end of the day, he didn't want to make the ministers feel like they were being undermined. But in the end, the system worked well. Yeah.
Churchill, how did Moi manage to balance Moi the technocrat and Moi the politician? How did he play his politics? There was no much political noise during that time,
of course,
compared to what we are witnessing.
Yeah, of course he was able to make the nation focus on what is important, and that is development. And as a result, you know, people follow what the leaders inspire them to do. And I think Moi was able to inspire the country and all his people who were working behind him to focus on development. And then the other thing was how much he was able to integrate some of these issues into his political philosophy, and specifically the political party. You realize that he was able to, through his organizational scale, he also organized the party very, very well. And he was able to cascade the political party across the country. He had key appointments, even in regions that were perceived to be opposition areas.
Exactly.
And he could actually meet some of those key people, even very intelligently.
Exactly.
You know, you just pops up and you say Moi was meeting this particular person. So you know, in that way, he was able to empower these political appointments in the areas that were perceived to be of opposition zones. So his organizational scale was very good. And because of that, his political philosophy was well embedded even into, that was the same thing that he embedded into government. So, you know, when you look at the way Moi led this country, Moi was able to lead Kenya with a vast majority of when you look at the political stratum in terms of the geographic distribution, the regions that were perceived to be opposition zones, majority of when you look at the political stratum in terms of the geographic distribution, the regions that were perceived to be opposition zones were actually areas that were highly politically active. And you know, that's why you realize that the opposition voice was very strong. But because of his master of politics,
but it was not strong enough to beat him for two consecutive terms after the introduction of multi-party.
That was now the reason why it was
he
called.
Still stood strong.
That is the reason why now he was called the professor of politics, because he was able to camouflage. And you know, by the way, when you look at the politics of the 90s and from the 80s, most of the people who were funding the people who were against the president, it was actually external funding that wanted to have their ideas and the ideologies penetrate into Kenya. And it's still about the issues of the Cold War still. And so you realize that from where he was sitting, he knew what was best for Kenya. And now you realize that there were people who, you know, non-government organizations, international government organizations are putting huge funding in opposition leaders to destabilize Kenya, to have the ideology get into the country, and specifically communism and socialism. So he was able to maneuver through that very, very wittily. Of course, part of the political weight came out being dictatorial, and you know, because he needed to show direction. He needed to show, you know, that this is the direction that we must go. And in one way, as a leader, sometimes you have to, in showing direction, you must be dictatorial, because people don't know where they want to go anyway. That's why they need leadership.
So was he a dictator? What do you feel? For some who feel that he was.
He wasn't. He wasn't. And I would like to say this. For anybody to have expected President Kenyatta and President Moi to behave differently from the way they did would be unfair to them.
Why do you say
These
so?
are two people who are now leading a young nation with a lot of differences. They had the law that would try and press the people to come together, and they utilized that law. It is unfair, for example, to compare Kenyatta and Moi to Uhuru and Kibaki. And the simple reason is this. When Kibaki came in, he found himself leading a nation which was backed by the two main tribes or ethnic groups. Basically the Luo and of course the Kikuyu. In my view, he would even sleep without looking at the intelligence reports, because the two tribes are already with him. When it came to Moi, up to the year 1978, it was very sweet for him. Up to the year 1982. But here we are, he felt threatened, and it was a true threat. He had to stand up and defend the nation. allow it to be united. And that's why he became a bit tough on the people. But he never became tough outside the law. He utilized the law to make sure that we remained united. The other thing which I would want to mention, Madam, is the fact that when you look at the leadership of Moi, it's not a leadership that came from a training college. It is leadership that was given to him by God. Because basically, he managed to run this country well through wisdom, not education. Mm-hmm. And he did this so well by ensuring that all the ethnic groups were actually represented even in positions. Because like, for example, as small as we are just about 300,000. But by the time I was PS, we had another PS called Masale. We had a minister. We had an assistant minister. Also privileged to have the secretary of the parliamentary group, Mheshimiwa Mocharo Kubo. Mm-hmm. He made sure that everybody was represented well at that high level.
Even the minority.
Even the minority, which is something that was actually implementing the Constitution of 2010, ensuring that the endangered species are also taken care of. So I would like to say that apart from training, apart from education, he had that natural wisdom which helped him to run the country well. And when he appointed you, Madam, he made sure that he knew you well. He had your telephone number. Even as small as we were, I would go sometimes to leave and I would find the president on the line. Mm-hmm. Just ask him with Mr. Mwaikasa, what is happening in this? What is happening in the other? And he would create confidence in you so that you do what is expected of you. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the instant firing, what is it that Moi hated really, that would push him to that level of just saying that I can no longer work with you? Having worked with him, what do you think are some of the issues that he never liked about those people who work under him? What was he strict about?
Betrayal. If you have been given a position and somehow you are just advantaging yourself personally rather than serving the people, that would really enrage him to the extent that he would say, I don't want to work with you anymore. The most important thing to accept here is that he appreciated good work. If you perform well and you are meeting the objectives of the office, you don't have any problem with you. That's how I believe I survived as a DC for 12.5 years. Otherwise I wouldn't be there, I would have gone earlier. But when you are performing very well, and he would even call you Jogo. Yeah. When you perform well, but when you perform below his expectations, he would not be happy with you, and he would fire you.
And tell you to leave the government vehicle at the nearest police station.
But give President Moi credit that this firing was never permanent, because in his political chess card, I think he used regions very, very well. And I think his strategists advised him extremely well that he never had any single dominant representative from any region. He always developed a checkmate. Yeah, so that if you have Brudin Abuere from the other side, if the other minister from that region misbehaves, then he brings up this other one. If you are from central Kenya, Mwai Kibaki growing up, becoming popular, he brings in JJ Kamudu. Yeah, if he's in Luo, Kenya, if Kalie Chodongo Mamo is becoming too elephantine, then you bring Okiki Amayo with the Kanu disciplinary mechanism to tame him. So he had a way of always having a checkmate in every region. So that whenever there was a signal that you are becoming disloyal, then the checkmate is brought up to sort you out, so that it was not really Moi doing it. A delegation from your district would arrive, and those checkmates would go and say it all. And then, obviously, the
was
president
wise.
would say, give it to the people, you get fired. And he kept, you know, changing that leadership and fanning that regional rivalry. And therefore always kept the noise at the local level. It was never at the national level. And that is why it became very difficult actually for the nascent opposition to put their pieces together. You remember even the original Ford, when it came up, that checkmate business came in and it split. They had to go to different directions, and that was Moi, the architect of divide and rule. And they went in different directions and he still got his way.
In the recent days, what we've had in a lot of these political platforms is this term, disrespect to the president, or will not allow people who disrespect president to speak. That term, disrespect to the president, has been heard a lot in our political platforms recently. During Moi's era, that was something that was unheard of.
It popped up when Professor Jonathan Karanja was made vice president. And it happened that, I don't know where a photo came from, where a certain person had gone and knelt as he was trying to get the ear of Josephat Karanja. And obviously Kuria Kanyingi, you know, from Kiambu, that time now, Josephat Karanja is the vice president, and then some nondescript called Kuria Kanyingi, in charge of some motor vehicle inspection, is, you know, suddenly made so important, and they start, you know, a campaign that here is somebody who is being worshipped, and that is how Josephat Karanja was thrown out of the Plum office of vice presidency. So yes, that disrespect came in. In fact, it is a hallmark of Kanu. Wherever any leader was seen to be disloyal or, you know, showing signals of betrayal, or when you are beyond your shave life, then obviously the propaganda that would be initiated was this person is disloyal, this person is disrespectful. Yeah, so what we are seeing played out today about the current leadership is a replay of the Kanu phenomena and toolkit of when people think that you have lived beyond your usefulness in a certain position, and the law does not allow you to get out in any way. So disloyalty or disrespect for the power that be is a song that would be initiated, and then perhaps by popular demand, then you know, the system will have to bow to the public demand and say sorry.
Okay, you can.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that, Madam, because if there is any danger that we shall face in this country, it's when we start disrespecting officers. You know, it was unheard of during Moi's days for a DC to be chased with stones. It was unheard of during Moi's days for an assistant chief to sit with a crowd. He would be sitting in a special place, honored and respected. I must accept that as much as the whole situation is political, there is something we have lost. If somebody is given an office, it doesn't matter how stupid he is, respect that office, honor that office. Because even in the home, unless you respect the father, there will be confusion. I think there must be somebody who will give the final instruction, the final authority. When we were DCs during Moi's days, our words and instructions were almost law. Up to the time it is revised or reviewed by somebody else,
That is the direction.
that is the direction you will follow.
Yeah.
And if you don't, I'll deal with you. I'll deal with you. So I think that thing must return to where it should be. So that if you are the president of the country, be respected. If you are the deputy president of the country, be respected. Because if we cause a dysfunction within that arrangement, the country is going to get messed up.
Churchill, where did the rain start beating us? Did Did presidency become too normal and too available and too reachable? What really happened?
Not really. I think these are some of the results of the philosophy of democracy.
Yeah.
Because democracy democracy is actually the institutionalization of freedom and individual freedom, where you believe that an individual is free to do whatever he deems fit. And so the moment you look at that democracy in view of the freedom philosophy, you realize that the individual person is so empowered. And so the center of power is decentralized from the district unit as it was during Namasaka's time to the individual, to the extent that even a district officer or a county commissioner or a county boss as of today know that he is in office not because he has so much power, but because the power is with the people. It has only been invested in them. So then you realize that the people, as a result of democracy, officers are helpless. They then are left on what they think that the people want to do. So that's why, for example, you see in political rallies, the people can be able to dictate who speaks and who does not speak. So it is actually philosophically it is exactly the opposite of what used to happen during Moi's time. During Moi's era, it was order coming from the days. And so, who speaks and who does not speak. So it is actually philosophically it is exactly the opposite of what used to happen during Moi's time. During Moi's era, it was order coming from the days. And so, even that means that even before the political rally is held, the people who are coming there already know expectations of what they are. They already know what they are expected of. You should not shout when people are talking. When the president is coming, you need to clap, ta 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 ta, order. So these are problems of democracy.
No wonder when Martha Karua once walked out on the president once, it was a big issue. It was a big issue that was really escalated, because during that time, that was something that was not expected.
Yeah, it was.
Let's talk about something else as we're about to climax. The democracy was furthered by the repeal of the Section 2A of the Constitution. Steve, what message did that send about Moi, just approving that to happen and allowing Kenya to become a multi-party state? And how did Kenya take a different direction in that time?
Thank you so much. Before that repeal, of course, there was a claim for multi-party democracy, which, constitutionally speaking, people were really calling for constitutional amendment. And President Moi, as a president who had taken oath of office, among other things to protect the constitution, had to take the lawful and constitutional position of resisting and, move to seek to amend the constitution. But his strategies, and this is where he becomes the professor of politics, the moment he found that he could hold no more, it is him who gave in, but with a sort of a curse. It was like, if you are really baying for multi-party democracy, it is going to bring ethnicity, it is going to bring, the instability in this country. That was his thinking then. But he gave it out and said, if you ask for it,
you
have it.
Did it deliver the promise, Churchill? The promise that multi-party was carrying, was it delivered? Going by what we are seeing today, how politics has been played out across the political parties? Well,
the process of perfecting democracy is quite long-prone. It takes time for democracy to be perfected, and specifically, you perfect democracy by institutionalism, building institutions that are able to curtail and safeguard the expectations of how to safeguard freedoms, how to safeguard the democracy. So this is something that Kenya is still at a young age in terms of as we perfect it. You look at countries like the United States that has years and years of democracy. they still are in the process of perfecting it. And the best way for us to do this perfection is to institutionalize more, strengthen institutions, and when institutions are strengthened, then we will then bring back and have officers, you know, having authority to do what the Constitution dictates them to do and perform their functions as per what they are supposed to do. So this is something that we are still in the process of perfecting. But I can tell you that apart from, you know, apart from the fact that when you look at the history of America during the civilization, when the blacks were fighting for their civilization, and you also saw it in liberalization, and you also saw it in South Africa, people were rising up, and uprisings were coming up because they were rising against dictatorial regimes, because they thought democracy is the best thing for us. But then once they got it, they then began to realize that this thing needed to be contained. So we are actually in a stage of democratization, and we are perfecting it. We are not yet there, but as time moves by, we are daily realizing, even to you at an individual level, you are realizing that when people talk, they are exercising their freedom, you are asking yourself, what kind of person is this? So even at our individual level with our own freedoms, we are realizing that, you know, this freedom, when it is too much, when it is not curtailed, it is dangerous for the country. So that thinking, it means that we are getting enlightened in terms of where we should be able to take our freedoms and democracy moving forward.
Mwaikasa, I wanted to weigh in on this. Do you think we've become too free? We insist so much on our rights. It's our right. We can do anything, say anything to anyone, anytime. Are we too free of a nation?
I would like to believe so. And it is important that we recognize the fact that there must be boundaries. To a certain extent, allow freedom, but also discipline whoever may go excessively to do what he feels he should do, and then at the same time affecting the neighbors and other people. What am I saying? What I'm saying is this, that for example, if you go to some areas, like in Coast, you'll find people talking about munazi ni haki yetu, and they'll drink from morning to evening without any control at all. If you go to the villages today, actually our society is just getting decayed simply because of too much control. I think it's important we try and evaluate ourselves now and see where we have given excessive freedom to the people, and try and control that. Because if we don't, the destruction that is coming will be terrible. We cannot really control it.
And by the way, you can already begin to see, even within political parties, they are appreciating that, you know, there has to be guided democracy. And that's why you realize that during times of election, there are instances where election does not necessarily go where the people prefer it to. So it means even in the advocates, those who have been in the minds of the advocates of freedoms and democracy, they know that people need to be guided.
Exactly.
My take on that is that what we are seeing as a disrespect today is purely agitation because things are not being done right. And it is a process in democratization, because we are still personality based, that things have to happen because so and so is there. As we mature and empower and functionalize our institutions, then we will have lesser people dominance, and then the institutions function, and then there will be lesser noise because there's nothing to agitate about. So this is a phase that we have got to go through as a nation, and it is important that every citizen express themselves on what their take is on the way the democracy is evolving, and how the growth of our economy, our governance, how they are evolving with time. And this is why we celebrate President Moi, because when it came time to let go, he let go. When it came time to hand over power, he handed over power. Otherwise, if it was a typical African statesman, then perhaps Kenya would not have got where we have got. Pressure is on us and our citizens to make sure that the country takes the correct trajectory in terms of governance, in terms of exercise of our individual rights, and in terms of placing this country where it truly belongs.
Yeah, true.
I
And he
think
actually, just go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing I think we should really appreciate is the fact that we cannot condemn old age when it comes to leadership in a country, because people are very excited talking about youth taking over. But the truth is, if you look even at the Bible, there was always a relay race between the older and the young ones. So the going away of His Excellency the President should also make us realize that there must be a mix. I was looking at the senators and the representatives in America the other day. As much as they are young ones, you can see very many old people with their wisdom, with their experience and skills and so forth. Now the danger I'm seeing, Madam, is this. After liberalizing the way we have done, we have given ourselves a lot of freedom.
Yes.
There is another disease that is coming in today,
What is that?
where people are talking about old men not being wanted in leadership and in
They
positions.
should be phased out.
They should be phased out.
There's the movement.
And now that would be a very dangerous thing for us to do. We should appreciate. And I think the whole process of sending away our late president has also encouraged me, because it looks like we are repenting of the sins we committed, particularly in Uhuru Park, where we were saying we can do everything without him. But today we are saying, yes, we made some
And he
progress.
said, you remember me.
But then, was that drama necessary? The handing over in 202?
It was a phase in life.
It was
because
in that season.
It had to be happen that way during that season, because the bulk of the citizenry or the fans who were doing that then did not see President Moi relinquishing power. It is like they snatched it from him, and even when he came to hand over, it never dawned on them that this is President Moi, the statesman, who, when he has been told hand over, will hand over. So that drama, yes, was there, but as gradually we transit to different presidential regimes, this will become lesser and lesser as the country matures.
Yeah, true. But he actually said this in one of his public speeches, that many were surprised when he said he wants to retire.
Yeah.
In a continent where people believe that somebody should die in power, you know, so he was actually ready and preparing himself for retirement. Gentlemen, as we are wrapping up this conversation, this mantra of peace, love, unity, this is something that Moi really kept close to his heart, and he inculcated this in the minds of so many Kenyans who are eulogizing him today. Right now in our country, if you read the temperatures of the politics that is going on, we are trying to go back to the same point, talking against the politics of division, talking against things that have kept us divided for so many years. I want you know, a cocktail of your response on how we make that dream a reality. How do we achieve the unity in honor of Mzee Moi? How do we get to that space where we can appreciate each other? You could be coming from Nyamira, I could be coming from my county. I don't want to say my county, but but then again, we appreciate each other. I could be from a different political party, you in a different political party. We believe in different philosophies and ideologies, but we still appreciate one another as Kenyans. How do we make that beautiful dream a reality?
If you ask me, we are on the way there. And part of the reason why we have too over-ethnicized ourselves is because of competition to leadership, and because of the slots that are limited, and because of the national perception that if you come from my county and you are the one at the cockpit in State House, then it is me. Yeah, we own this thing ethnically. And that is why the BBI process, if it gives an opportunity for us to expand that divides us, that makes us say, if Philomen Mwaikasa is the one there, then me, I'm not there. If that be the way to show inclusivity, to bring patriotism back, to get national ownership, then so be it. We have an opportunity as a country, and as the country evolves, we really must get it right, like Tanzania got it, so that we have a seamless country, borderless country, a de-ethnicized country that makes us look at ourselves as Kenyans, and it's not going to be easy.
All right.
It's not going to be easy, and that is what President Moi kept singing, saying, you people with your political parties, they are not even political parties, they are ethnic parties.
All right,
and indeed, it came to pass.
Thank you, Steve. Philomen, as you add on to what you said, also just give us your final words as we prepare to lay Mzee to rest on Wednesday.
Okay. I think one thing which is important is for us to try and evaluate our journey in building this nation. Unfortunately, as we got independence, our priority was the economy. We never really got into the value system of this country. So that my take in this one would be that at the end of the day, let us have our politics reviewed, and we must have a lot of commitment. You can talk about BBI, you can talk about the constitution which we got in 2010, but are we really serious about some of these things? Because basically, politically, in my view, we are very cosmetic.
All right.
There's a lot of pretense within the country.
We are not genuine.
We are not genuine at all.
Thank you so much for that. Churchil, your final
and I can't agree more with my colleagues, because you know, we really have to find a way of building a value-based society.
Exactly.
And institutionalizing, strengthening our institutions. People will always follow what the country values. If the country values corruption, that is what we will value. But when we put strong values, when we put our key focus and strengthen institutions, and we make institutions see each and every person, not from corruption, that is what we will value. But when we put strong values, when we put our key focus and strengthen institutions, and we make institutions see each and every person, not from where they come from, but the content that they can be able to give to the nation, then we make the people focus on building that content. So I think for me, in building an equal society, we need to have institutions that see Kenyans for their value, not for where they come from. And that then will then separate, make Kenyans separate themselves from believing that, you know what, I can get the best if I know someone.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Churchil Saoke. He's a political and governance analyst. I've also been talking to Philomen Mwaikasa. He served during the Moi era as a PS as well as a DC in Moi's Baringo County, and has shared with us quite a lot about how it was back in the day. Plus, I was having lawyer Steve Mugaka, who came in today to talk to us about Moi the businessman, Moi the entrepreneur, Moi the investor, and a lot of lessons that he borrowed while he interacted with Moi in his transactions. And thank you so much for creating time for us. But in honor of the late Mzee Daniel Arap Moi, this broadcast continues in the Swahili language. My colleague Boni Musambi will be driving that conversation in a bit, so don't go too far. This conversation continues as we learn and celebrate more about Moi. My name is Safin Achieng Oma. Until this far, our sign language interpreter was Lucy Maura, of course assisted by Steve Dunde. We are just taking a short break, but when we come back, the Swahili team will be here to continue with this very great conversation.